Okay, let's get going. Welcome to the final morning session of entitled Reimagining the Future of the Workplace and How the Pandemic Has Affected Women. I'm Wendy Papworth, former Head of Diversity and Inclusion for Barclays Bank and now a freelance de&i consultant. I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel in just a moment. But first, I just want you to consider some statistics, and they are aligned to how the pandemic has affected women, but also more into reimagining the future of the workplace. So just recently, the Fawcett Society in the UK stated that a third of working mothers had lost hours or work due to lack of childcare. And I think for those of us in the UK with children, celebrated International Women's Day with all our children going back to school. So that's a third of working women have lost work or hours due to lack of childcare. But for Black, Asian and ethnic minority working mothers, it's actually increased to 44%. And the Fawcett Society went on to refer to a coronavirus crossroads. And I rather like that terminology of a coronavirus crossroads because it means that we have decisions about where we go and what we learn from this pandemic across the globe. Also, and I think Minaki referenced this at the start of this morning's conference, is McKinsey in their annual report of women in the workplace recently talked about 1 in 4 women working in corporate America were actually thinking of downshifting or leaving the workplace altogether. And that represents 2 million women in the corporate sector in the US alone. And then we do hear of incidents of high levels of burnout. And this affects many people, both, all genders. But this particular statistic was that 98% had seen a 98% increase in women's anxiety disorders. So, I mean, there's some statistics to think about there. If I think about the flip side of coming through this pandemic, and thankfully we are on that road now, I think many companies are starting to think about a more empathetic leadership style, and that's been referenced in earlier sessions today. A greater focus on well-being and diversity and inclusion being at the core of what many organisations are thinking about. And recently it was reported that over a third, in fact 34.3% to be precise, of board members in the FTSE 350 are now women. And that's a 50% increase over the last 5 years. And just under a third of women are sitting at the most senior levels in those same FTSE 350 companies. So some things to mull over, both the positive and not so positive. And I'm delighted to say we have 3 of those companies from the FTSE 100 represented on our panel today, along with another huge multinational company. So I'm going to start by introducing them. So in alphabetical order, I'm going to introduce Jackie Beer, who is the Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion at British Telecom. Appy Rami Jayaranja, also known as Appy, who is the Head of UK Wholesale at Aviva Investors. Anjali Meenan, who is Regional Head of Talent APAC and Sub-Saharan Africa from Nestle, and in a different time zone, so coming towards the end of her working day. And then John Murphy, Vice President, Employee Engagement and Relations at Burberry. So welcome to you all. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I thought perhaps we could start if I turn to each of you to expand a little on your firm's approach to gender diversity. And maybe I'll kick off with Anjali, who's the furthest away in this virtual environment. So Anjali, maybe talk a little bit about Nestle's current approach to gender diversity.
Thanks a lot, Wendy, and hello to all of you. I think Nestle as an organization, we started this journey on gender balance and diversity, I would say, about in a very focused manner since 2009. And it's as an approach, we are clearly committed to diversity and inclusion. And there's a huge focus on inclusion at this point of time, what I would like to say over here. In terms of the progression on the gender diversity, what Nestle is focusing is to create an environment which is appreciative of the differences that we all bring. Differences in gender, differences in race, in ethnicity, nationalities. We are present in more than 180 countries as an organization, and if you look at our headquarters in Switzerland, it has about 100 and more nationalities. That's just there. Globally, we have about 300,000 plus employees. So, by the fabric of the organization itself, it is diverse. And the question comes, and the challenge also comes for organizations which are by design diverse is how's the inclusion, and that's the main focus of Nestle as a company now. On diversity, yes, we are focusing on the aspects of mindset, on the aspect of getting the right policies and framework in place, and also on the aspect of how we provide the support environment and allies for gender balance, right? And these are various factors which go into it. Uh, on Because being an FMCG, what happens for us is we have our workforce is there on the field. We call the field force, which people who are going to the market and traveling, fair amount of travel, and with the diverse setup that we have, uh, the political, economic, and the infrastructure context comes into picture. There are people who are working in the factory because we have a manufacturing setup as well. So this creates a challenge for the organization. It also creates an opportunity for us, and that's where Nestle has been strongly working on the mindset piece. And one of the key things which I would like to share is unconscious bias has been something uh, which impacts inclusion very strongly, and that's where we started working on these programs and awareness session. And not only that, but also how to get the leaders to acknowledge it, talk about it, and bring it to the teams. We not only looked at people who were based in office environment, but we also focused it on the blue staff, which is there in factories, which was a big leap forward because um, being in so many countries, there's a language context. There is a context of how the economy is. There's a context of how the culture is for women. And how did we translate that at that level is I would say one can be very proud of because the scale of it is huge. So that's just to quote that instance of how we are focusing on even in manufacturing setup. Just as an example, in Pakistan, we had created because traveling was a bit of a concern. We created the right kind of facilities within a factory so that we have more women there. We have a forklift operator who is a women employee. So it was also about creating the right messages and the role model and saying it's not only when you are in office space in different environment in different contexts we can still have women, and it's doable. So that's a part on the mindset translating to actions and then scaling it up and taking it forward.
Yeah.
The Yeah. So this was just an example, and we are also on the Bloomberg Index, being quite happy to be there for our gender balance initiatives. Nestle has pledged with the UN in terms of supporting the women. So there is a lot of focus there, and I will continue to share as we go forward, and I'll pass it on to my co-panelist from here. Thank you.
Lovely, Anjali, and I've made some notes which I will circle back with you on. So, Appy, Aviva Investors, part of Aviva Group, quite different, I suspect, from Nestle.
Yes, so being a financial services organisation, nearly all of us will be office based. So one of the policies that we do look at to promote gender is the obvious one around flexible working. How do you make that available? And that's a policy that we've had in place for a long time. But I think what COVID has done is really changed the way in which that is being used. And I think that's something we can pick up later on in the session. As an organisation, we manage the assets on behalf of our clients, and that's 350 billion worth of assets. So what we do is that we use our voices and our votes to engage with other companies around gender, around ethnicity, around other factors, so that we influence change as much as we can. Because as an active manager, that's one of our strong main focuses. But then we also turn the lens on ourselves, and it's really thinking about what do we do to bring talent in from the grassroots. How do we branch that out? Because policies that we currently have in place may have been set up a long time ago. And how do they need to evolve to be able to get the broadest list and opportunities out there, whether that's gender, whether that's ethnicity and other minorities. Then it's how do you retain the talent that's within the organisation? And Wendy, you mentioned a really good point around returners. How do you support them when they come back into the workforce? Because there are factors that impact them, that maybe confidence, being back in a new environment. And then how do you get them up the leadership scale so that they become senior leaders? So we're looking at things in those four segments, really. And there's a lot of work to be done as an industry. We do need to work towards really reflecting our workforce to reflect the clients that we serve. And that's also impacting our clients. So we've been doing that in partnership with them. And having an open conversation. I think what we do need to do is not fear experimentation. What's worked in the past is not necessarily what's going to work in the future. And also to be curious and ask those questions to be able to create a new working environment set up for the future.
Yeah, great. I love not fearing experimentation, and I think that resonates with all the science and work that's been going on during the course of the pandemic. But also, as you talked about, Appy, the influence that all your big organizations can have with those customers, suppliers, the people that you influence. It's just not within your own workforce. So let me turn to Jackie, and maybe you can talk a little bit about British Telecom and the work that you've been doing.
So gender diversity has been a focus for BT for quite some time now. And we've always valued gender diversity and tracked it. But I think it's reasonable to say in the last year or so, we've seen quite a step change at BT. So we are approaching it very systematically. So everything we do across all elements of colleague experience, whether it's talent attraction or how we recruit and so on, we are taking a very deliberate evidence-based approach to it. And we are looking at a lot of data, because we I'm a huge believer in sort of looking at the research, looking at the evidence, and piloting and working accordingly. I think that hope and aspiration and positive thinking doesn't lead to change as much as we might want it to. So we've been very pragmatic about what actually shifts the dial and focusing our attention there. I mean, BT is an organization with a huge customer base, and a big supply chain and so on. So we're quite clear that gender diversity is a business imperative to us, not just for our workforce, but also for ensuring that we have a positive impact on our supply chain and the way what we design for our customers and so on. I mean, as I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, but obviously homogenous organizations are weaker because they don't benefit from that degree of cognitive diversity, which does lead to sort of more innovative and innovative thinking. So yeah, we are very focused on it, and we are also very focused on issues of intersectionality, which I will probably come on to later. That the experiences of different women from different ethnicities and different backgrounds varies significantly. And obviously, as you mentioned, Wendy, the coronavirus has disproportionately impacted on certain groups of women and so on. So, and we are alive to all of that. So we are approaching it in all the ways we know will drive progress and lead to better outcomes. So we're very much measuring ourselves by progress and outcomes rather than just wishful thinking and input, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jackie. And John, just following on in terms of the work that you're doing at Burberry, and I think you're probably one of the few people on a panel who can actually wear your organisation's clothing. So I recognise from your wonderful shirt. Although I suppose Jackie could hold up a phone and so on, but yeah, that's fantastic.
I do have an EE phone, so yes, I could.
Lovely. So John, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the approach you're taking at Burberry around gender diversity?
Definitely. I would say I think it's the only place I've ever worked where turning up in the same outfit as one of your colleagues is it's kind of expected. It's not a different thing, not a disappointing thing. I think so. Our teams we're roughly about 2/3 women globally, and we've been recognised as a top performer in the FTSE for women in leadership for a number of years. And there's a historical connection for us. So women have played a huge role in creating today's Burberry. We're incredibly proud of our heritage, and we want to recognise and sustain those positives, but also look at how we can build on this in the future. So we launched our current de&i strategy in July, which is focused on valuing and embracing differences and creating an environment where everyone feels they can belong and has a voice and can reach their full potential. I think we take a very holistic view at how we achieve this. So for just a couple of examples, we look through our policies, which is something close to my heart, through leadership accountability, through role modeling, through learning, through listening, and lots of other elements. And I think I was interested in what Appy was saying about how they use their voice externally. And we're very conscious in that. I guess we do it in a very different way. But we're proud of championing and advocating for change makers, for organizations and initiatives that have a meaningful impact on all underrepresented communities. And we also think it's really important to celebrate diversity in our campaigns, in our shows. So hopefully lots of you will have seen our recent shows and can see our commitment to diversity through that. And we've got measures in place to make sure that we assemble casts that are representatives of our customers and our communities. I think it's really exciting being involved in this area at the moment. I think you can feel a real energy and buzz from all of our colleagues around this work. I think for one example, on the final day of our latest pulse survey, which goes out to all colleagues, and I was looking at where we were at last night, and I think the highest number of comments that we'd had by far was people contributing ideas in support of our ambitions on de&i. And I think about half of everybody who'd responded had an idea on what we could do to contribute. And I think that's really representative of how committed our teams are. I think we're all in, we're proud of where we are, but we're really excited about how we can build on this and improve in the future.
It sounds as though, John, you're going to be pretty busy if half the respondents have shared some commentary on diversity and inclusion and what you could be doing. And that aligns to what Jackie was talking about in terms of metrics and being guided by and driven by the metrics rather than sort of, sometimes gut feeling on these things. So I'm just going to maybe stick with you, John, because obviously you're in high-end fashion, retail, and you just really wanted to maybe do a deep dive, starting with you, John, on how the workplace has changed during the pandemic. And that's the looking back piece, but then the looking forward piece. How do you think it's going to change for your organisation going forward?
Sure. So I think there's a few bits. I was thinking about the things that were unique for us rather than representative of everybody. And I think so. A high proportion of our teams, around 80%, it's not easy to work from home in the teams, whether they're the manufacturing teams who are making the product, whether it's the retail colleagues or those who are working direct from product in the design teams. And I think obviously the overwhelming focus looking back has been how we can keep them safe and healthy. But we've also made like a number of innovations to allow some of them the opportunity to work from home. And I think lots of them 15 months ago would have said this was impossible. And I think as we look forward, I think it's similar to everyone else. We want to learn from this and look how we can play it forwards. I think again, the different part for us on office teams is like creativity is at the heart of our business. And for lots of us, connecting in person is integral to that creativity process. And that's been something which we've, that's been a difficulty we've been trying to overcome. And I think that there were reasons that people came together in offices. And I think the challenge for us now is to take what we've learned. We all went home and we all worked and the world still turned and we managed to still create things. But also remembering some of the good things about why we were in offices previously and how we can, it's very simplistic, but really it's about that optionality for people and about that flexibility to allow people to continue working, having some sort of choice. I think one of the other bit, which is I guess a different perspective that we've been focusing on, is what we can look at so that we don't have a kind of a last year from talent perspective, a lost year, sorry. You spoke at the start about the impact on people's careers, and it's been really important for us to try and keep that development and keep the pipeline of diverse talent. We've got loads of examples of how the business have evolved. So how people have found different ways to sell, how we've used virtual appointments, how we've had different ways to show our product. And we wanted to have that same focus on individual growth for all of our colleagues around the world. I think, just as a couple of examples, which I think are going to stick around and we'll see in the future for years to come, we've launched new entirely virtual onboarding programs to try and accelerate the speed at which colleagues can feel part of our team. We've had a huge push on on-demand digital learning materials, which I think lots of us will have seen and have been tremendously successful. And we've had to flip our approach to how we look at recognition programs to go from in person to online. And again, I think just from one example, we used to have a wonderful annual Icon Awards, which was, it was a wonderful event, but it was very special for the nominees. And now we've managed to transform that into an all-company moment where everybody comes together and celebrates achievements through the year. And I don't think we ever would have got to there without this, but these are all positives which are here to stay for the long term, I think.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, some of these things I know the rest of the panel are probably nodding along to this. Is this sort of recognition for all and bringing more and more people on board because the technology allows us to do that. And I'm interested in what you were saying about the creativity, because very often in the past that has been creativity has really worked when people have been in the same room together, and that just hasn't been possible. So how that changes will be interesting. So Anjali, I know you had to drop off, and welcome back. And we're just moving on to talking about how the workplace has changed during the pandemic, and John was just talking about from the fashion retail side where some colleagues just simply couldn't work from home, but also how they've embraced different ways of working and thinking through how they onboard, etc. From your point of view at Nestle, where you've got so many different roles, and I suppose in a way similar to Burberry, but how's the pandemic changed your workplace? Maybe share a few examples with us.
Thanks, Wendy. And yeah, technology can be a blooper despite the virtual situation now. Happy to be back here. So for us, as you said, it's the workforce, the work profiles of the workforce is extremely diverse, and that is very challenging because as I mentioned, you have people, we are producing a product, we are selling a product, as well as we have a huge office-based employee. So first and the foremost thing for us was the safety piece. Like I think, for most of the people. So the focus of the leadership of the organization, which went with the COVID situation, was how do we guarantee the safety of our employees? And everything starts from there. So the first part of the safety was about physical health safety. Yes, and those were the conversations which happened. There was a lot of discussion around um, whether we can have people, what set of population can we have working from home, what set of population we need to be there at a workplace, and having good solid reasons for that. And for that set of a population, how can we facilitate even the transportation piece, along with, of course, the environment where they operate? How is that environment going to be safe for them? So having put that huge emphasis and focus around the safety, physical safety. And as the pandemic progressed, the second stage came as people were getting into, there were a lot of stress, there was anxiety, and then the mental health and well-being piece came in. I think, and that was the second phase of is where this whole conversation happened. And interestingly, because where I sit for, our team's responsibility was usually around the area of talent and learning, etc. And suddenly we were looking at how can we support on the mental health and well-being. And so we started those conversations, and so it moved from a part of, I think the shift has been from employee engagement to employee well-being. Now, engagement is not a big area of focus. The most important area of focus is the well-being. So that's the shift one has seen strongly in the organization right across. So it started, and this was very interesting because it was a sort of a build-up, bottom-up, I could say. So we are there in countries. That's where it started, and then went to the headquarters, and now everybody is a huge focus. So yeah, we were all building the plane as we were flying. That's what was going on. So if we can put it, and there were a lot of learnings which came. So, and then the third piece came in. Okay, now what do we do about um, the planning aspect? And that's another shift. How do you shift the focus on planning? Because we are an organization which has been in existence for 150 years plus. You see, and we like to look long term, and of course, we need to look long term strategic planning. So, how people can focus from quarterly, annual, half yearly planning to scenario building. And that's where the mindset shift also happened, not only for leadership, but also for everyone. Scenario building become a very important factor so that you can keep on, have a plan A, plan B, and keep shifting. So the concept of agility really brought into life, and supply chain was very strongly impacted. And I think most of my co-panelists will agree that was a stream which was very important. And we are a food and beverages company. Everything is supply chain. We buy commodities, we sell products, and it's food. So they were the people under a huge amount of pressure. And how do we support our partners then? Our distributors, even where we buy our raw material from, the farmers, the cocoa producers. So it was a huge mindset shift which needed on how we are interacting with our stakeholders. Just to say a few examples, and it all went through a big change in the way we were operating. And the business focus was to get much more sharper in terms of what we are trying to achieve. So our focus on sustainability, it only got enhanced with COVID, because it actually was an humbling experience of how important nature and climate can be. So rather than saying that now we need to generate profits, the point was, okay, sustainability is something which has become a huge key, and we defined this roadmap on being carbon neutral by 2050, and how we can have the plastic plan of recycling and phasing out the plastic. So COVID brought sustainability into center of the conversation much more strongly, rather than focusing on other things. So that's just a few examples of how things changed. Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks, Angela. I mean, you talked about the sort of human, the safety into managing stress, then scenario planning, and all of those sound as though you're going to carry on through post-pandemic. So Appy, just picking up on that point. I mean, you talked about with Aviva Investors about holding your clients to account, or not so much your clients, but those where you place investments. So How has this pandemic shifted that thinking and for the future?
Well, holding clients to account, or investors actually, who we
Yeah.
to account, sorry, we've been doing that for 40 years, and it's actually just intensifying it, and actually very similar to what Jackie's talking about. It's about, you know, providing the evidence and not giving them the expectation on what we want from them and the accountability for them to do that. And if they don't, the consequences for us, not if they don't follow through. And I think that's the difference here. It's about holding the accountability back on the organisation and also on ourselves and what the consequences will be. And that's something that we have shared at the beginning of this year on that topic. What's been really interesting with COVID, and actually we went virtual overnight. So as a sales team, we used to speak to people face to face, and we can no longer do that. And it impacted our clients in exactly the same way. For the first times in anyone's career, if they're junior salespeople all the way to senior, you're looking into people's homes. So you're having to engage in a slightly different way. And it goes back to what you mentioned at the beginning around empathy. You have to, everyone's in a difficult scenario. But what that creates is an environment of awareness for our male colleagues and people of all backgrounds. And sort of, we're all in this together, but actually everyone's impacted in a slightly different way. And okay, so how do we then apply a more agile approach, as Anjali mentions, even in our style of engagement with our employees, particularly with women versus men, how a female feels in this scenario versus a male will be different depending on the responsibilities that she might have. And that's been really interesting, specifically in the hiring process. As an organisation, we actually hire based off strengths. The power of doing that, if you're basing off skill sets, is only as powerful as how it's implemented by the line manager and the third parties that we use. And it's really been able to give an opportunity to really shake that up and say, okay, what does good look like now? So I've recently just gone through a hiring process where we removed past experience from a criteria, because then that opens up opportunities, like you mentioned, Wendy, around returners, because they would have been excluded in a long list. And we'd actually done similar things to what John mentioned around recognition awards. And we would have had a big event around that face to face. Whereas now we actually did something very similar. We did it virtually. But by doing it virtually at roughly a halfly acceptable time slot meant that you could have global colleagues all take part at exactly the same time. So it created a level of connectivity that we thought that, although we always thought technology would, in a different way. So people can communicate instantly. You can get instant feedback, whether it's our colleagues in the US and Asia and Australia, and that we can give our clients up-to-date live feedback, which was really, really powerful. So where are we going to go to as the future? Is it's probably going to be more of a hybrid model. As an organisation that we've been working for 350 years. And I'd actually say a lot of our practices historically as an industry, I always use about the Industrial Revolution versus the technology, is what do those practices look like now? We had a standard 40-hour week. Do we need to? Because we've got a phone that is constantly buzzing about something else that's going on at work. So it's a great opportunity to revisit that. And we've been thinking along the same lines as what John mentioned around what does going back to the office look like? And similarly, creativity and collaboration is super important in financial services as well. So we will be going back to the office, but in a slightly different way. And we're already looking at what our office setups would look like so that we can create more of a collaborative environment. We've proven that we can work effectively from home. So we no longer need to be in the office 5 days a week. But when we are in the office, we want it to be impactful. And we're getting that feedback directly from our employees. And it's very much a back and forth to just try and figure out what that looks like when we're in the phase in which we can go back into the office.
Yeah. Some wonderful takeaways there. Happy. Jackie, last person to go last on this particular question, but what would you like to add and share in terms of workplace change during and post-pandemic?
Well, very much, echo what everyone else has said already in terms of our real life domestic circumstances have been revealed to our colleagues in ways that weren't visible before. And those of us like me who have sort of caring responsibilities and 2 small children that who popped up on camera and so on. I mean, that's just become the norm, hasn't it? And for some of us, I mean, so I think that it's been positive. We've kind of proven that we can deliver, and we can, and we can work flexibly, and we all get to kind of know each other better. And I think that we've role model to our own children and to the children of our colleagues around sort of working, and that mums and dads work and so on. But there is the unavoidable reality of caring responsibilities disproportionately impacting on women. Even in households where there are 2 parents, but obviously bearing in mind most single parent households are women. And then and actually that does mean that there has been a sort of significant burden. So we've been thinking through that and how we support our colleagues. BT is a diverse organisation in the non sort of D&I sense of the word diverse, and the fact that the largest part of BT is Openreach. So during the pandemic, the field engineers who work for Openreach have been out there in the field as key workers, doing work that you simply couldn't do from home, or our call handlers who answer like the 999 calls. So we've had a significant cohort of colleagues who have been frontline key workers, who've been parts of the key sort of national infrastructure, and we've been very focused on their safety, their sort of physical safety, and their emotional and mental well-being. And those of us that work at home, there's been a big push around what we've been doing to support our colleagues and recognize that we're in a sort of a brave new world where worlds are colliding, workloads don't necessarily ease up despite these, but despite the world colliding. And I think going forward, we will be looking at a hybrid way of working, a sort of blended way of working. But I do think that we need to sort of caution against having no boundaries at all. We need to ensure that we can work when we want to work, and we can be present when we want to be present with our friends and family. The problem with phones, as Appy said, is that they can ping all the time, and you're kind of like your reflex is to look at them. But actually, if you're in the middle of a bedtime story or cooking dinner or something, it's not. I think we should feel able to put down boundaries about where we want to spend our time and how we want to prioritize. And I suppose the other thing that I would just flag up is that from a broader point of view, the impact on the environment to all of us now working from home is going to be huge. I know we're all talking about it as this is great, no more commuting and so on. But we've recently started doing some work with behavioural scientists more than now around the impact of the carbon footprint of everyone working from their individual homes. Everyone's got their central heating on and so on. And when all the individual homes used to be sort of left, while we all piled onto the buses and the tube and went in into one building that was heated. So I think there are lots of unknown outcomes yet to come out of this. So, but it's an interesting time, isn't it, to be in the workspace with all the unknown variables, some that we can see and some that we can't see. But women's equality and how we support all women and recognise that different women have different needs, I think, is central to all of this.
Yeah, totally. Lots of things that resonate, Jackie. And I'm just thinking about maybe taking that into the next question I was going to ask. You talked specifically about some impacts on women, and maybe I could turn to John or Anjali to talk about how the pandemic's particularly deep dived affected women, female colleagues, customers, and suppliers. And I think I do have a technology problem, so I'm going to hand that over to John, maybe to talk a little bit about specifically customers, suppliers, and colleagues who happen to be women, and then I'll rejoin.
Thanks, Wendy. I think there's a lot there. I guess the one bit that I pick up on, I think we've been really aware of is similar to Jackie's point around the kind of the light that the pandemic's shone on the double shift, the unequal division of unpaid labour, and particularly for parents and carers, and how this disproportionately impacts women, and particularly given the demographics of our workforce. We've been very conscious of that, but also thinking about how we can commit and support all parents and carers. We were really proud in April to launch a new parental leave policy, which equalised the leave to all parents globally. And we've been, trying very hard to remain true to this commitment throughout. For example, in how we've offered additional paid leave and extra flexibility to all parents, and we've looked at how we can, equally support, or how we can create communities to equally support through peer-to-peer support all of the parents and carers in the organisation. I guess if I can say, one point as the man on the panel, if we can look at one positive to take to the future, we've had a huge focus on allyship in the last year. As one example, we've used BBC's Ally Track tool to help colleagues think about how they can be a better ally. And I think one positive, like Jackie's mentioned, about the kind of the unavoidable domestic intrusions into work life. I have 2 young children. I think most of the people I work with will have seen them at some point over the last year. I don't know how good my microphone is, but my youngest is currently making pretty vigorous complaints about bedtime. And I guess for me, I now know that lots of colleagues and lots of other people in the organisation are in a similar position. I'm a huge believer that the one way that men can help is to be vocal allies in this area, and the last year's helped that. And I think if people see us switching off to look after our children, and I think, particularly the less fun areas of looking after our children and the less glamorous areas of looking after our children, then it supports an environment where everyone has permission to do this. And I guess my hope for the future is that we'll take this and we'll have this opportunity to be more open about all our responsibilities in future, and that as men, we can be role models and, I guess, frankly, do our share of that second shift.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I was reflecting on this thing about leveling up, and because of being so virtual, and the vast majority of people working in a different way, in a virtual way, it's leveling up in so many different ways. So that sort of greater understanding between parents of what's required, because it can be really tough at times, and this element of kindness, I think, coming into it, in terms of people being kinder to each other, around some of just the challenges, because it's been such a blurring of boundaries around home and workplace, home place and workplace. Anjali, so I mean, I'm very interested, if you've talked about sort of generally how the pandemic's affected your workforce, but specifically for women, both from a customer and a supplier point of view, what's been your experience?
I think I would take from what John was talking about. It's really interesting. I'll start from the employees part as well for women. In December 2019, Nestle, we launched a global parental support policy, which was gender neutral. And what we saw with COVID, when COVID came in, it really accelerated the uptake. So, because we are a global organization, we like to put guidelines, and then we allow the different countries to adopt at a certain pace. So we put in, okay, by 2022, we expect all of them to be have implemented. But 2020 was equalizer, or leveling up, as we can say. It actually made people realize how important it is to have gender neutral policies in place, and the uptake increased. And that the other thing which also happened, unfortunately, COVID has led to increase in unemployment, right? And when that situation came up, and the choice is not usually of the individual, it depended upon the job people were doing. So certain sectors were more impacted, and sometimes it left the onus of being the provider, financial provider in the family to women. And when we go to a cultural context of culturally, where usually it's male is the leading carrier, now it was depending upon whose job is safe. And we really see that at times it's people see the merit of having employment active, and this is not from just an organization, but I'm talking more in terms of a social fabric perspective. That's observation which is happening, that yes, it's good to ensure that women are in the employment, are not dropping out as well. There's a bit of a conversation happening around it, which is a shift as well. When we look at our customers, food and beverages companies, when we started, there was a lot of hoarding. So yeah, there was, I would say business wise, it seemed that we are in a space where um, we are, we are selling more. But then as we progressed, it has a negative impact, because purchasing power of people is going down, the economy is going down. Overall, it's a negative impact on the business. And women are dropping off from the workforce more overall. And what Jackie is saying is absolutely correct, because the stress and the COVID fatigue is impacting women much more strongly, and especially when you have young children. And this whole schooling getting virtual is creating huge amount of pressure. So these were the few aspects. There was some silver lining in terms of how it's an equalizer, but there are definitely a lot of negative impact as well. And it's interesting to see how we'll move to the hybrid workplace, which will be our case as well. And some of our countries were specifying, and they're working on saying what are the mandatory touch points, and if we can lay those guidelines, and then we keep it open, setting the boundaries plus setting the important interaction points, because empathy is coming to the center of everything.
Yeah,
Which
I
is,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm quite conscious of the time, and we've had quite a wide-ranging conversation. So I'm just going to hand to Jackie and then to Appy, just to think a little bit about sharing any additional comments about specifically the female perspective on the pandemic. And then I'm going to go to questions, because we've got some great questions that have come in. So Jackie, do you want to just add anything further from your previous comments?
No, but I would just remind us all about the intersectionality point and the impact of the pandemic disproportionately affecting women from ethnic minorities. You know, for all sorts of kind of the health implications and certain ethnic minorities being overrepresented in certain sort of frontline jobs and so on. You know, I feel, despite my homeschool horrors, I've been working at home, right? So you know, I haven't, and I'm, so I don't want to be to seem oblivious to that. This is a nuanced picture, and therefore whatever businesses do to recover and whatever society does needs to recognize that.
Yeah. And I think, your point about intersectionality, one of the things I was reading is the impact on older women being almost forced out of the workplace during the course of the pandemic. And so I think the intersectionality piece is a really important component. Appy, any thoughts from you?
I think it's the obvious one that's been focused here is that it's humanization. What's happened here is that we now have more empathy to each other, and with intersectionality, we're all a sum of our parts. The only way that this is going to work is actually personalization of how we speak to individuals, whether they're females, of which background, what is impacting them. We've spoken about women and individuals in the workplace with children. There are women and men who have elderly parents to take care of. There's been other problems and other things that are on their minds that are impacting them just as much. There is this period of long COVID, and the long COVID individuals are actually individuals in the mid-30s to mid-40s. So we do need to really leverage, what we've seen here and change our style. And I think we've spoken about that earlier in the conference, to lean into that and see, okay, then how do we adapt to give everyone the support that they need so that it's commercially beneficial for us all.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I love the fact that you've seen acceleration of take up of policies for which has probably changed some of the dynamic where culturally maybe people thought, well, that's a great policy, but it's not for me, or I can't do it because I'll be seen as different. Um, so I'm going to go to some questions because we have had some coming in, and some are specific to some of our panelists. So I'm going to start with you first, John, because a comment first and then a question. So this Anna has said she's loved seeing Neelam Kaur Gill modelling for your campaigns. But are you looking to take this to the next step and have brown women of different shapes and sizes walking for Burberry?
I'm very careful about speaking for my creative colleagues.
I was thinking this was a tough one for you, John. To ask it.
I think, look, I said before, we're really committed to looking at what we can do to reflect the communities and our customers in how we present our collections, and hopefully people will have seen that over the past years when you look back at what we've been doing recently, and we're all excited about how we can do that in future. But it's not my area to be telling what's coming up in the future.
A suggestion you can take back, which I'm sure they're probably already considering. Jackie, question from Donya. Very interesting to hear various perspectives. I wonder though what the impact of the pandemic is on women who do not have caring responsibilities. I think both you, Jackie, and Appy touched on this. Is there something anyone can share around the impact of the pandemic on women without caring responsibilities? And I suppose that would apply to men as well. So Jackie, do you want to kick off with that response?
Well, I think a lot of the research that's been done, whether it's by the Foresight Society, I think you referenced at the beginning, Wendy, I don't think necessarily dissects by caring responsibilities. So there's a huge amount of stuff out there. I think I speak about women with caring responsibilities because it's sort of front and center of my own personal mind and of most of our colleagues that I've been working with recently. But as we know, just those people who are in minority or underrepresented groups, when they are often they can often have the worst outcomes and the worst experiences, can't they? So in terms of that kind of impact, we know, for example, there's been a huge economic impact on the number of women disproportionately losing jobs in the pandemic. And of those women, they have been much more likely, the stats show, to be Black or Asian. And this economic impact is not just going to be on their kind of current daily income, but will also have an impact on pensions and all sorts of things. So it's a multifaceted problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a long tail to this. Appy, any thoughts?
Well, it's the obvious one as well. How about the individuals that are by themselves? And it's a topic that we spoke about not so long ago. And integrating back into the office when you've been sitting by yourself is fearful for some of us. So what we are looking at how we can support individuals and who are on by themselves, people that you might even be flat sharing, for example, and what equipment we can provide them, what well-being care that we can do. Can we coach individuals with anxiety they might be feeling, what gaps they might need. So it comes back to that personalization. We really need to look at our respective teams and then look at what are the needs there and how we can support that. And we've done that particularly on a case-by-case basis with the kids going back to school on the 8th of March. It was like, okay, how are we going to implement this? It was like, well, let's look at our teams and let's see what everyone needs here. We need to do the same with everybody else.
Yeah, I love that concept of personalization, and in whatever size your organization, and we're talking about big organizations with you guys, is that how do you do that personalization when you're talking about large numbers of people doing many different roles in many different countries. Anything that John and Anjali would like to contribute to or respond in terms of those women who don't have caring responsibilities and how we look after them?
Um, yeah, I think if I can add on from really from a HR perspective, what we saw, people who are single, irrespective of the gender, are also quite strongly impacted when they were locked up. The whole isolation piece has led to complications in terms of mental health. Again, I'm coming back to that. What we saw is that people started adopting more pets just because they needed a human. Yeah, and that was quite interesting. And this is um, uh, because the team I have here in Malaysia, we are from 9 different nationalities. They have relocated, and my own team has team members who are living all alone, and people were trying to find coping mechanisms. So what we realized as an organization, we started creating these forums of conversation where it's by invitation. I mean, you can choose to come and join. So, and where people share their experience, and people also, and we get some experts to provide some coping mechanisms. And it can be about care. It was about self care. It was about compassion. It was about neuroscience, really bringing science, psychology into the conversation and saying, hey, it's normal. It's okay to talk about it. And how you can have your buddy, how you can have your happy space, things we were never really talking about in the organization. We brought this and we started doing it from April onwards, in fact, at least in our region. And everywhere by second half of the year, these conversations are happening. It was very interesting because the uptake started from about 50 people joining to about 250, and it kept on increasing. So we created a sort of community. Having this community of support within the workplace, it is very helpful. So people is being inclusive. You try to give them options and say, you reach out where you feel most comfortable. So those conversation leaders started valuing it a lot, because earlier there was always this perception of maybe it's a tokenism, but now it's a need, and everybody across the organization, right from the leadership, is saying this is important. We need to spend time, money, efforts there.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe as we think about reward and benefits in organisations, pet insurance might be a new one that comes on as a result of the pandemic. So I have one more question for all of you. And this is an interesting one. So, as many of us are used to having a certain appearance in the physical office, do you think women are faced with more pressure to look made up and professional in the virtual meetings that you've been accustomed to? So, I don't know who would like to have a go at responding to that. Go on, Andy.
I've got to say, my appearance has changed throughout lockdown, if I'm totally honest. I think I started off with dressing in the clothes I normally wore to work, just to keep it going in the first couple of weeks. But that only lasted, I think, a week. And then I was wearing t-shirts. It became uniform for the rest of the time. And then it became a choice on what was deemed appropriate in front of clients. We didn't set a precedent here, apart from don't wear hoodies. But what I'm wearing now, I've just got a jumper on rather than a suit jacket. It's sort of smart casual is what we've used. Well, what I felt comfortable using when I speak to clients. But with the team, it's become very informal. And with the business as well, if you're presenting to the board, there's no expectation to turn up in a suit and high heels anymore. And it's also what makes you feel better. But just to add on a personal self-care perspective, I've actually started wearing makeup in lockdown 3 in the mornings, just to have a different self-care routine to keep things going. But it's whatever works for everybody else.
And is that gender agnostic, do you think?
I think it's gender agnostic. I think everyone, I think everyone has their own things that they like doing for themselves. So, I think men and women show themselves care in either the same or different ways, don't they? I know some of my male colleagues are really making a point of shaving every day and wearing. I was hearing the other day about someone's particular choice of aftershave and how they, there's a point around, and I think makeup and clothes can help you distinguish between the space that you're in, whether or not you're now in a work zone and you are meeting people and who you don't know, and it's that clothes do affect how you feel, don't they, physically?
Yeah.
So and if you are in a different headspace, perhaps more relaxed, that might be reflected in what you do, what you wear, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. No,
Again, it comes back to the boundaries between sort of personal and professional spheres, and clothes and makeup and aftershave and all of that kind of thing are quite good signals, aren't they, and signifiers of where you are.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm very conscious that we are up on time, so I'm going to probably wrap up there and just say a huge thank you to John, Appy, Jackie and Anjali for thinking this through really carefully. There's so many things that you've talked about that I think I'll be taking away and writing up and pondering on. So many thanks, and enjoy the rest of the day. And I think we're now on lunch, so everyone enjoy the lunch.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.